हमारे पैगंबर हज़रत मोहम्मद मुस्तफ़ा सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की अज़मत को न सिर्फ मुसलमान बल्कि गैर जानिबदार गैर मुस्लिम मुसन्निफ़ीन भी तस्लीम करते हैं। उनकी ज़ात अक़दस के मुताल्लिक़ मग़रिबी मुसन्निफ़ीन ने बेशुमार कुतुब लिखी हैं और उनमें एक बहुत बड़ा नाम डॉक्टर क्रेग कॉन्सिडाइन का है, जिनकी एक ट्वीट कुछ दिन पहले आई थी, कुछ अर्सा पहले, और उन्होंने उस ट्वीट के ज़रिए मुसलमानों की तवज्जो जो है अपनी तरफ मबजूल करवा ली थी। उन्होंने पैगंबर इस्लाम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम के मुताल्लिक़ कई कुतुब तहरीर की हैं। हर किताब में उनकी अज़मत की दास्तान बयान की है। उनकी ताज़ा तरीन किताब जो है उसका क्या नाम है? ह्यूमैनिटी
ऑफ मोहम्मद, पीस बी अपॉन हिम। और इस वक्त मुसलमानों और नॉन मुस्लिम्स में यकसा मकबूल है, मतलब हर शख्स इसको पढ़ रहा है और बहुत बेहतरीन किताब ये लिखी गई है। ट्वीट जो उनकी मशहूर हुई थी, जिसकी तरफ लोगों की तवज्जो गई पाकिस्तान में भी बड़े पैमाने पर, उस ट्वीट में उन्होंने कहा यह था कि मैं एक अमरीकी ईसाई हूँ और पैगंबर इस्लाम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की हुर्मत का दिफा करने की सलाहियत भी रखता हूँ और इसके लिए हरदम तैयार भी हूँ।
वाह।
डॉक्टर क्रेग ने किताब का मकसद भी हुजूर पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की ज़ात अक़दस का दिफा करार दिया है और इस किताब में उन्होंने बतौर माहिर समाजियात हज़रत मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की ज़ात की इंसानियत से भरपूर जो खूबसूरती है, जो उनकी ज़िंदगी में वैसे तो कई पहलू ऐसे हैं कि जो हमारे लिए लेकिन ख़ास तौर पर उन्होंने जो तवज्जो दी है वो नबी अकरम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की इंसानियत, ह्यूमैनिटी के हवाले से बात की।
आज डॉक्टर क्रेग हमारे साथ मौजूद हैं, उनसे हम बात करते हैं, आपकी भी मुलाकात करवाते हैं। डॉक्टर क्रेग, अस्सलाम वालेकुम एंड वेलकम टू द शो।
Greetings, thank you for having me.
So Dr. Craig, can you tell us how did your interest in Islam and the Prophet of Islam start?
So it started when I got to college. This is just after 2001, so the events of 9/11. I was 16 when that happened, so that was very fresh. So I go to college at American University in Washington, D.C., and I'm trying to figure out why something like 9/11 happened. So I started taking a bunch of courses on Islam, and I had this one class called The World of Islam with Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, who is the former High Commissioner from Pakistan to the UK and Northern Ireland. And this class just really opened my mind, but it also opened my heart to the power of interfaith dialogue and pluralism and tolerance and coexistence. So I was under his wing for years, and I really felt that the message that he was giving me, but also the knowledge that he was sharing with me, was really an antidote to the clash of civilizations. You know, this idea that the West and Islam are fundamentally incompatible and that they're destined to be in conflict and in violence. So it's really, for me, it's about knowledge. It's the power of knowledge that's not only found in books, but the power of knowledge that we get through human experiences and engaging in dialogue with one another.
Right, so let's come to the books, the subject of writing. Tell us about all your books. You have, this is not the first book, Humanity of Muhammad, peace be upon him, is not your first book on this subject. You have written several of them. So tell us a little about all of them.
So the most recent book that was published was People of the Book, Prophet Muhammad's Encounters with Christians. This was published by Hearst and Oxford University Press. So it's essentially a biography of Prophet Muhammad's life told through the prism of his encounters with Christians. So I start with the story when he was a young teenager with Bahira the monk, and then I move on to Waraka ibn Nafal, and then carrying on throughout the course of his life. So looking at the companion's relationship with the Christians of Abyssinia, and then moving later in Prophet Muhammad's life to his encounter, his beautiful encounter with the Christians of Najran, when he allowed the Christians to pray inside Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina. So the book really focuses on the beauty of these relationships. And it's not just about our theological connections between Christianity and Islam, which there are many, but it's more about how Prophet Muhammad treated people. And he treated people with respect, with dignity, with humanity, and I think probably most importantly, hospitality. Right. So the book is really a biography of his life, and it's also a glimpse into the Christians that were around the Arabian Peninsula and even further up towards modern-day Jerusalem and Damascus.
Right. But there are a lot of aspects of his life that we can learn from, but you have particularly chosen humanity of Muhammad. Why is that?
Well, I think a reflection of who he was. So as a scholar and an author, if you're writing a book about an individual, a biography, you would, I think, ideally approach that topic objectively. And when I look at Prophet Muhammad's life, I see humanity. I see all the things I previously mentioned, this love of diversity, of respecting people, of making people feel like they can belong to a given community. And I think that his character and his life and his legacy of this humanity is more important now than ever. And it's not just about humanity at large, it's also more specifically about Christian and Muslim relations. So I wrote the book not just as a kind of scholar, I also wrote it as someone who has really grown to admire Prophet Muhammad, but I'm also a strong believer in this idea that his humanity can help us solve a lot of our current issues, and it's kind of like a cure to some type of disease that has really brought humanity down.
So that's very true. That's very true. Okay, now there are a lot of people in the West who don't seem to understand the life of the Prophet, the personality of the Prophet, the teachings of the Prophet, and they start to ridicule him. Why is that?
So I think there's a lot of reasons here. I think first and foremost, I think in the West, there is a serious lack of knowledge, just general knowledge about who Prophet Muhammad even was. So there's a huge gap in even basic understanding. You know, most Americans, if I could put it into the context of my own country, wouldn't even really know that Islam and the message that Prophet Muhammad received from our Creator is a continuation of Judaism and Christianity. So I think a lot of people wouldn't even understand that. So there's a lack of knowledge. And then as an extension to this, not only is there a lack of knowledge, but then we get into the lack of appropriate, objective takes about his life. And what we see in the West are crude maneuvers in which people might take one quote or one hadith or one instance in his life completely out of context, and then try to paint a wide brush and just say, well, this is who the person actually was. So there's a lack of knowledge. There's a lack of good knowledge. Then I think there's something more serious, and then there's something more sinister. The more serious thing is apathy, that people actually don't care to learn about his life. And I think this is unfortunate, and it's kind of sad because, as I mentioned earlier, his life and legacy has so much to teach us, not only Muslims, I mean, the whole of humanity. So that's unfortunate. Now, there is a sinister side of this too,
right,
where people will take this kind of misconstrued idea of who he was and use it for political gains. Like we saw it recently with the Quran burning in Sweden. Obviously, this isn't necessarily pertaining directly to Prophet Muhammad, but we see these groups just fanning the flames of division, of separation, and of hatred. And this goes back to the apathy. Like these are people and groups that really don't even want to come to that common ground.
Right.
That's actually what Prophet Muhammad was all about, bringing people to a common space and having this type of dialogue so we can get to know one another. So it's a multifaceted issue, but it really points to lack of knowledge, apathy, and sinister political motives.
Okay.
Very well explained, actually.
What do you think if an incident like the Quran burning incident happens in the West, or an incident like ridiculing the Prophet happens in the West? How should Muslims behave? What is your opinion?
That's a really good question. So if I can put this into the context of Muslims, what should Muslims do when Prophet Muhammad is defamed? Honestly, in my own personal opinion, I think it should be ignored. And I think Prophet Muhammad would always take and he did, always take the higher road. We have examples of in his life where one of his neighbors would, constantly throw trash on him as he was walking to the masjid, and this was almost like a daily occurrence.
Yes.
He just carried on because he knew that his mission was much higher. The things that are happening in his world here on earth are important, but there's a higher divine creator, and there's a higher mission. So moving beyond these kind of petty insults, a caricature, it's a drawing. It doesn't really take away anything that Prophet Muhammad accomplished in this world. So I would say ignore it. I think that's what he would do. Now, for people in the West, I think the best way for people to become more, let's say, familiar with Muhammad is not to look at, let's say, traditional theology. Look at how he treated people. Look at how he interacted with the various tribes of Medina when he migrated there during the second Hijrah in 615. Look at how he welcomed the Christian of Najran into the masjid in Medina. Look at how he took care of women. Look how he took care of orphans. I think we have to focus on human stories. This is the best way to learn. We can get to the theology, we can get to the major religious claims at a later point, but you really have to get to know who this man was on an everyday basis.
Right.
How he treated his family members, how he lived in his home. He was someone who always did his own chores, which I think says a lot, and how he treated strangers and friends alike. So we got to start there.
Yes. So the people in the West should do this, but like you studied the Prophet's life, and now you know who he actually was. He was the greatest human being. But when it comes to other people, sometimes it seems that they are just there to talk negative about him. Maybe they have a political agenda or something like that.
I think this goes back to people having, as we discussed earlier, kind of like sinister motives. Like you can cherry pick any religious text. You could cherry pick the hadith. You could cherry pick various moments in his life that we're familiar with and say that, he would justify this. But whatever that justification is might have a kind of sinister side, but there's always going to be a story that uplifts our humanity. Right. So we almost have options as human beings. Like we can look at the controversial stuff, we can look at the divisive stuff, we can choose to focus on oppression and alienating people, or we can go to the more constructive, productive, peaceful, and pluralist examples. So it's almost like an inner spiritual struggle that I think people are confronted with. Why don't we look at the example that he provided for humanity? Why are we looking at something that he may have done completely out of context? Our understanding of it is completely out of context, and it happened in the 7th century, which is a completely different social, political, and cultural environment. So it's really about what people bring to what they bring in their heart and their mind to reading like the Quran. If you're going into the Quran with a certain objective or goal, you could probably find something to accomplish or to justify your sinister motive. But you could also find something, if you bring that peace and that love into the reading, you can find that as well. So we have to really look at uplifting people as they engage with this extensive body of knowledge.
Right. Absolutely, you're right. I would want to know that, have you read Quran also, in order to understand and in order to get a better idea of who Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't claim to be a scholar of the Quran. I'm not a hafiz. I have not memorized it. However, I have engaged with it thoroughly throughout the years. I've been studying Christian-Muslim relations and interfaith dialogue and the life of Muhammad since I was 19, which is half my life at this point. And I always run my research through the Quran, right? So making sure that what I'm writing about Prophet Muhammad doesn't contradict something that we see in this holy book.
Wonderful.
There's also excellent biographies that have been written about Prophet Muhammad that are actually telling the story of his life through the Quran. So there's one book by Professor Juan Cole, who's based at the University of Michigan here in the United States. It's called The Prophet of Peace. So he uses the Quran to explain Prophet Muhammad's life journey, where as a sociologist, I'm drawing on a wider, more extensive range of sources, if I could say that humbly. So yeah, of course, I'm familiar with the Quran, but again, I'm not claiming to be a scholar of it.
Right.
Okay, and what was the response of people on your book?
There's been a spectrum of responses, if I could put it that way.
Okay.
My immediate family is very supportive of my academic endeavors and have always supported the work that I do. And I think a lot of that had to do with when I started back at American University, as I mentioned, with Professor Ahmed, and they saw the positive impact that he had on me as a human, and that kind of gave the thumbs up in their mind that this person had a positive influence. However, there were people within my social circle throughout the years, so not at any one given point, who are suspicious. They might think I'm a secret Muslim, or that I'm doing things like writing books and giving speeches around the world for fame or for money. So some people just don't know about the true mission, which is really just about building bridges and making this world a better place.
This is a very important mission
for us. Now, there's also a significant backlash, let's say, among so-called Islamophobes or anti-Muslim bigots who work deliberately and consistently, and have done so for many years, to discredit my work, as a scholar, which I welcome. I understand that that's fair. But then there's also a attempt to discredit my character. Like there's been a bunch of articles written that I'm deceptive, that I'm working and I'm being paid for by the CIA or by various international entities. So there's that. However, I'd say the bulk of the response is positive. Muslims around, the best thing that I can get is a message from a Muslim who is like, I read your book and I've never read a book about Prophet Muhammad that was written that way. Or they might say, I've never thought of it that way. I've never pictured a biography of Muhammad being told through sociological principles. So that's really, really uplifting. And the other element that's really uplifting is receiving messages from Christians who are just like, I had absolutely no idea that Prophet Muhammad even engaged in any of these activities, or that he stood for this, or that he actually even engaged with Christians. So there's a spectrum. I think in this field, given the controversy over Prophet Muhammad in the West, like, you kind of have to have thick skin. Like, I don't listen too much of the criticism. So it's just part of the nature of the work that I do.
Perfect.
Perfect. And we are also very, interested and very eager to read your books,
Yes.
all of them actually, not just the one that we are talking about particularly here. But what I would want to ask you finally is that what are the moments while reading about him, what are the moments that left you really, really inspired? Are there any? I'm sure there will be. But
that's such a good question, and there's so many moments in his life or messages that he gave that I could choose, but let me refer to two.
Okay.
The first is the relationship that he formed with Bilal ibn Rabah, who was enslaved. He was half Abyssinian, half Meccan, if I could say that. And I think what inspires me about Muhammad's relationship with Bilal, who again was enslaved, wasn't that Muhammad merely freed him, literally like cut the chains of his shackle, cut the shackles off and liberated him. But Muhammad created a community and a society that allowed Bilal to flourish, that allowed Bilal to utilize his God-given potential, to maximize his God-given abilities. So those are two completely different things. You could just free a group of people and say, well, you're on your own. But Muhammad did that, but then he said, but I'm going to make sure that this person can thrive, that this person can live, that this person can love, and that this person can contribute to the betterment of society. So I think that's a very, very powerful story. And then secondly, I found it quite interesting in my previous book, People of the Book. Muhammad had so many encounters with the angel Gabriel. And as a Catholic, angel Gabriel is so critically important, especially to the story of Jesus.
Yes.
Because Gabriel
Absolutely.
is the angel that visited Mary, that basically brought into this world the idea of a miraculous birth and that Jesus was coming. And Gabriel, of course, is the angel that visited Muhammad in 610 in the cave on Mount Hira.
Yes.
And my understanding, at least what the Islamic sources say, that Gabriel visited Muhammad more than any other prophet within the Abrahamic tradition.
Yes.
Which I find very inspiring. So Gabriel, in addition to someone like Jesus and Mary, is a figure that can unite Christians and Muslims. He can serve as a type of glue for Christianity and Islam to come together to better understand one another.
Rightly said. It was an inspiring discussion with you, Dr. Craig, and we look forward to reading your book.
Yes, and many congratulations to you once again on the books as well, on this amazing work that you're doing, bringing people together and creating a space where everybody can breathe happily and they can live peacefully. And congratulations for your newborn baby girl. डॉक्टर क्रेग के यहाँ अभी कुछ दिन पहले ही एक बच्ची की वलादत हुई, छोटी सी बच्ची की, और जब हम उनसे इंटरव्यूज ले रहे थे तो मतलब हम टाइम ले रहे थे उनसे, तो वो उसमें मसरूफ थे कि मेरी बेटी छोटी अभी पैदा हुई है और बड़ी डिमांडिंग है, तो इसलिए हमें थोड़े दिन लग गए, लेकिन बड़ी ज़बरदस्त इनके साथ डिस्कशन थी और मज़ा आया।